It's now time for this panel to start, so I'm going to hand over to the panel chair, who will in turn introduce all the panelists, and the panelists can now probably turn their video on. Thank you, Shakira. Shakira Martin is one of TASO's many trustees. She's been hugely supportive as we spun out. She's also previously, you may know, the former NUS president, where I first met her and became aware of all her great work to try to tackle racial and other inequalities in higher education. So great to see you, and great to have our partners on this call as well. And I'll be logging off now, handing over to Shakira.
Thank you. Hello and welcome everyone to TASO's first conference. Thank you for sticking with us for the whole day, and I hope you enjoyed your lunch. So welcome to the final session. As Omar said, my name is Shakira Martin, and I'm the current head of student experience at Rose Bruford College, and privileged and honoured to be a TASO trustee. And I'm really excited about the work that TASO is doing, really providing the evidence base that is so needed to tackle the long-standing inequalities that we're facing in our higher education sector and universities across the country. We've had excellent panels this morning, starting off with social mobility and how can higher education help us build back better. The second one was on using evidence in policy and practice. The third one was around supporting and extending opportunities for mature students in higher education, which I really enjoyed because it made reference to the importance of further education, which many of you may know I'm a really big champion of. And it segued us nicely into our final panel today, which is entitled, "What Role Does Evidence Play in Closing the Race Equality Gap?" And just to reiterate some of what Omar said previously, please enter any of your questions through the Q&A function and not the chat. And although we and I encourage questions at any point, we will have opportunity at the end to answer any questions. We'll try to get through as many questions as possible, but please continue the conversation on the TASO hashtag. And I'll just like to let you know and remind you that this is a webinar and the sessions are being recorded and will be distributed afterwards. So I'm really excited again to be chairing this panel. TASO is currently working with speakers from the University of Leicester and the University of Kent on a research project looking at race equality gaps in higher education. And I'm really excited to be joined by our fantastic panel, who I'd like to introduce. Once I introduce the panel, they will each have a 8-minute session slot to be able to give their opening statements, which will be followed by some questions. So first of all, we have Dr. Ian Campbell. He is an award-winning academic and lecturer in the sociology of race and inclusion at the University of Leicester. And Dr. Paul is as I said, award-winning academic. His first monograph won a BSA Philip Abrams Prize in 2017, and he has published widely on the areas of race, identity, and inclusion. He has led on a number of wide-range race equality and education projects, including decolonizing the curriculum and tackling race equalities. We also have Dr. Barbara Adewumi, who is a postdoctoral research associate in student success at the University of Kent. And Barbara has worked at Kent in the School of Social Policy, Sociology and Social Research since 2011 and 2019, also as a sociology lecturer. She's now worked as a research associate at within student success, and her research focuses on academic progression, closing the awarding gap, sense of belonging, which we've heard so much about today, and in the engagement of Black and minority ethnic and wider participation groups. And finally, but not least, we have Patrice Mighton, who is a student, always bigging up student representation on these panels. So double welcome to you, Patrice. And she is the Diversity Marks Intern at the University of Kent. And Patrice is in her third year of her sociology undergraduate degree in the School of Social Policy, Sociology and Social Research. And Patrice was employed in 2019 as a diversity mark intern through the work study scheme run by the University of Kent's Careers and Employment Service, and has worked in collaboration with the student success staff on the Diversity Marks project. So welcome to you all. So I'll first like to hand over to Barbara, who I think has a presentation, who will open us up with her opening statements. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Shakira, for that lovely warm welcome. So now I will attempt to share my screen. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so before beginning, I'd like to clarify the terminology that I'll use today. The term BAME or BAME is a collective term used by the British government to describe a range of people of colour in the UK, including those of Black, Asian, and minority ethnic heritage, hence the acronym. We used that term because our study was set in England. In using these terms, we risk homogenizing the experiences of groups of people from a diverse cultural and ethnic background. We don't want to do that. Rather, we must remember that these descriptors have been imposed on people for statistical purposes as opposed to them self-identifying in that manner. So let's start from the beginning about this project. So in 2018, Dave Thomas and I developed a methodology to review stage 1 reading lists for the School of Social Policy, Sociology and Social Research, if I may say SSPSSR from now on to make it quicker. So we did this, conducted this reading list in terms of its diversity to find out the terms of its diversity and its reaction to the awarding gap. The pilot project was funded by the Faculty Learning Teaching Fund known as TESA. And the aim of the project was to investigate and reflect on the reading lists in relation to the demographic composition of its sources. Students presenting the data of the module reading list to module conveners stimulated a fantastic discussion. So in the summer of 2018, Diversity Mark research students presented the findings of reading lists, putting the spotlight on the whiteness in the curriculum. So for example, out of 17 core module reading lists they reviewed in SSPSSR, nearly 70% of the authors were white male authors, and only 2% of the authors consisted of BAME male authors, and only 3% consisted of BAME female authors. And just 27% of authors were white female authors. So on the whole, the research aimed to really stimulate discussion and provide a collaborative space where the research participants and researcher will benefit from evidence-based research. So from here on, the pilot project was upscaled and given additional funding from TESA. Once again, we were successful with that, to invest time and resources in order to continue collecting data and developing the methodology with several other schools. So the curricular review process that we had in the pilot has now been fully embraced by the institution. So it is now called Diversity Mark and is led by the Student Success Team and Library Services, and employs student interns as active participants, looking at how to diversify reading lists as a key step in bringing about curriculum change. So this process map shows the collaborative features of student success and the library, and how students all work together to support academics to gain a curriculum change. So the key things here really are the academic process is used to reflect on the data reviewed and presented by students, which are then discussed with their students in the form of, say, conducting focus groups, which again are conducted by our students. So it's very, very much student-led. So this activity in its entirety leads to curriculum change as more diverse content is included in turn. This then helps students to engage far more and improves their overall experience, and develops graduate attributes such as cultural awareness, cultural sensitivity, critical consciousness, and critical reflection, both by students and by the teaching staff. So in total, there are now up to 12 schools that are part of Diversity Mark. The project is also attracting national attention through various presentations with student collaborators such as Patrice Mighton that I have given in various presentations across the country. So by 2020, among a variety of interventions addressing race equality gaps in student success, the Diversity Mark Initiative seemed to be the most promising for a formal evaluation to be conducted with TASO. Kathleen Quinlan, who is a professor of higher education, and I, along with Dr. Ellen Dowie in the student success team, bid for a collaborative grant from TASO so we could carry out a robust evaluation of the impact of the initiative on race equality gaps. That grant then allowed us to hire Dr. Mi-Young Ahn, I know it's a lot of names to remember, the postdoc researcher on our team. The aim of the project really with TASO is to evaluate whether diversity module curricula to include BAME authors and their perspectives on reading lists and in the content of the module increases in attainment among BAME students on those modules and improves their experience. So those two assertions that are there on the slide. So the key link here is if students do not see themselves represented in the curricula, the process, the teaching practices will continue to disadvantage students. So the quantitative evidence base that we have been collecting over the last 2 years has been an investment of academics' time, students and institutions' time and money. So from the original TESA funding for the pilot project, we have been able to apply the original methodology each step of the way with TASO. So as we continue to provide evidence-based, that has now convinced key stakeholders and academics in various schools to engage with the process. And so we hope that all of this work that we have done over the last few years and now currently doing with TASO will answer these two assertions on the slide. Okay, there's a slide missing, okay. Okay, so we're now going to move to the process of the theory of change, which has been summarized for this presentation. So in addition to our colleagues working on the reviewing of the reading list, we have used theory of change. And this theory of change includes that is simplified here to show that the reason why we've had input processes and output is because that module conveners may not be aware of just how white, male and Eurocentric their curriculum is or are. Through their BAME students, though their BAME students, may be aware of it or may not be aware of it, depending on our focus group findings. A reading list audit raises awareness of this issue, while a debrief survey in which they respond to the audit results and are pointed toward relevant resources raises their commitment to diversify their curricula. So we are analysing the contents of the modules to see how diverse and to some extent how culturally sensitive they are. We have also administered a survey assessing students' perceptions of cultural sensitivity of the curricula, as well as measures of their engagement, which Mi-Young Ahn, our postdoc, is currently analysing. Mi-Young has also run some focus groups to understand and further obtain perceptions of the curriculum. So we look forward to seeing those results in the late summer. So for now, we have completed another audit of core reading lists required of students in the 4 focal modules. So the table shows that in the experimental modules of E1 and E2, 22% and 70% of the readings referred in the VLE Moodle pages were by BAME authors, compared to 5% in the comparator modules C1 and C2, which are here. And E1 and E2 are here, and that's the total there. So what we're finding is that there was very, very small, absolute small numbers, quite small numbers remained in terms of how diversified the reading lists actually were within the experimental modules, which are here. So only 6 out of 28 readings in E1 and E2 experimental modules were actually found. I know I'm conscious of time. So just to end, because there are some other technical randomized control experiments that we are doing known as difference and indifference, but we really don't have time to go into detail in that right now, but it is in our protocol page, which is on the website, TASO website, which we can lead you to on later. So just to end really, that we have found definitely that evaluating race equality gaps is a complex process. So this project has looked at just a small sample of modules. We have only dealt with the 5 modules out of hundreds of degree program modules, where it has been a complex process to work as a team and collaborate with staff, students, and library, as well as strategically prioritize the expertise within student success teams, as well as teaching staff. So the communication really has been to challenge, has been a real challenge, obviously, because the pandemic hit in the middle of the whole project that we were doing. So just to finally say that the call for reform and the curriculum to reflect the student body has to happen now. So Kent is having to quickly and effectively respond with all of what's going on, you know, including the Black Lives Matters movement of last year, including the pandemic of last year and continuing on, which further disadvantages students, particularly those with protected characteristics as well as students of colour. All of this work, with the echoing calls of students of colour in higher education on why is my curriculum white and why is my professor not black, raises the issues of race equality gaps. It's just one piece of this puzzle. It just raises the idea to me that there are many pieces to the puzzle here, and other changes in our universities need to be addressed in dismantling the inequalities in HE. Thank you for listening. Back over to Shakira.
Thank you, Barbara, for your presentation. It was very interesting, and I'm sure you'll be able to delve a bit deeper through some of the Q&A. In particular, I liked the fact that you mentioned, and I think obviously I'm a student representation person, that you spoke about like the collaboration with students and the feedback and the focus group. So it's really good to know that students were at the heart and are at the heart of that project. Thank you very much. And over to you, Dr. Paul. Thank you. You have 8 minutes.
Hi, thanks, Shakira, and thanks for inviting me on. So I'm going to try and share my screen now. Hopefully you can see that. Yeah, okay, brilliant. Okay, so great. Hello, everybody, and thanks for attending and staying with us for the whole day. So what I'm going to try and do is I'm just going to try and use our project on evaluating our Decolonizing the Curriculum Toolkit, and which is sponsored by TASO, as a way of kind of to speak to the themes of this panel, which is kind of what role does evidence play in closing race equality gaps? So just to give you a little bit of context about our project. So at the University of Leicester, 53% of our students are from Black, Asian and minority ethnic backgrounds. And thanks to Barbara for articulating so clearly about the kind of bureaucratic use of the word BAME, which we are using here, but we don't subscribe to. And what we found is similar to the national picture, is that there were gaps in awards and in satisfaction between students from white and BAME backgrounds. So our intervention was a series of interventions designed to address these kinds of racial inequalities, and one being the Decolonizing Curriculum Toolkit. So at the University of Leicester, our position to decolonizing is really about disrupting pluralizing content and adding to, trying to get a more rounded and fuller curriculum that speaks to all of our students and an equity of the ways in which it's relatable to all of our students from different backgrounds, particularly those from BAME backgrounds. So it's about adding to, not deleting. And so what we found generally was, with some of the problems with existing toolkits, was that they were either kind of rather complex and rather large, and naturally so because of the complexity of their argument, but sometimes these was ranging into the 20-25 pages in length. And equally, the complexity of decolonizing often our difficulties translating into ways in which we might measure their effectiveness and impact. So our response was the Decolonizing Curriculum Toolkit, and a much more kind of practical and pragmatic teaching focused resource. So we designed really a 2-page entry-level resource, which provided module leaders with kind of guidance and prompts of how to make not just their module content, so things like reading lists, etc., but also assessment and also their practice much more racially inclusive and relatable to all of their students. So this was really with the aim of improving the racial literacy and standardization or standardize the levels of racial inclusion across all of the modules that we offered, especially irrespective of either the subject or the teacher's prior familiarity and knowledge of decolonizing work. And the fact that it was pedagogy focused on content assessment and practice meant that it was applicable to all courses and not just subject based. And I think it's important to set the parameters of what we've called the Decolonizing Toolkit, because clearly you're not going to achieve decolonizing the curriculum in its fullest sense just by working through a 2-page document. So what we're really trying to do is this should be seen as the process starting the conversation and starting the first steps, not the conclusion to. This is the beginning of the process of redressing and trying to address those inequalities to which we're familiar here. Okay, so the toolkit was piloted in the academic year 2019-2020, and it proved remarkably effective in aiding staff at all levels to identify kind of the racial inequities within their practice and their own, and within their content and within their own pedagogical practice. It was piloted in modules in the second half of the semester, and because of the lockdown and industrial action, that impacted slightly on the extent to which we could test it against the student experience. But from the staff perspective, we saw quite remarkable kind of impact. So as we can see here, an early career academic said, I think it's great, easy to understand, and a good starting point for teaching staff. As a GTA, the toolkit has made a huge difference. It's given me more confidence to discuss topics such as white privilege. The senior academic said it gets the right balance between basic steps like thinking about imagery and content to more complicated revision of thematic content. So against that, the toolkit was rolled out across all sociology modules. They were reduced a bit this year because of kind of online delivery, but it went across 31 modules. And so where TASO have came in is that this year has been evaluating the impact of the toolkit on improving the BAME student experience and the award gap against these 3 key objectives. So the extent to which it improves BAME student satisfaction, reduces the difference in assessment and award outcomes, and its capacity to foster a stronger relevance of module content to the lived realities and histories of BAME sociology students. And so what you can see here from the objectives is that it required a mixed methods approach and a combination of different kinds of data to respond to it. And that then really leads me to the, brings us back to the point of this session. So what role does evidence play in closing race equality gaps? So it almost goes without saying that kind of empirical based evidence is central to us to testing the effectiveness of these kinds of interventions on the BAME, in kind of trying to equalize the BAME student experience. And put simply, it enables us to measure if we're having a positive impact on things like the award gap. So yes, on one level, it's about evidencing our effectiveness, especially for those of us in institutions who are trying to lobby for change. Look, we've seen much debate recently on even the existence of structural race-based inequalities. So data evidence and data are the only way in which we can convince and motivate peers, senior leaders, the general public, and so on, of both the existence of inequalities and how we might address them meaningfully. But I just want to finish on this pertinently. The question for me, however, is what kind of evidence do we value and do we prioritize? And how does this impact on our ability to close these kinds of inequalities? In the UK, we value quantitative data and we prioritize quantitative data. Data generated from surveys, numerical data, percentages, and so on. And I argue that we have to have a much more balanced understanding and appreciation of qualitative data too. This is especially important if we want to adequately capture, understand, and respond to the BAME experience in HE in relation to tackling these kinds of inequalities. The identities and experience of minority ethnic students are complex and can't be simply understood by quant measurement. You can't get a true sense of what it's like to be Black on a course simply by scoring it 1 to 10. Or judge the understanding or understand the experience simply by looking at award outcomes. These are in effect symptoms of the experience, not the cause. So while quants, we might see patterns, if we don't have a better appreciation of qualitative data, we'll never be able to fully understand why these inequalities happen, the root causes for them, and prioritize. If we continue to prioritize quant data, we'll consistently be unable to see the full causes and the inequalities and be unable to see the full effect that these marginalizations have on those that are impacted on them. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Paul. Thank you. I was really particularly interested in your approach to making it relevant to all staff so that everybody can take something from it and see how it fits into their practice and, as you said, pedagogy. And I really get you on the qualitative versus quantitative, or, you know, because I'm a person about real life experience. One of the things that I realized in the recent race report, when I read it, was like, it doesn't measure my heart and the feelings of racism that I've been experiencing. So I felt that on a proper level. So thank you, Dr. Paul. And last but not least, Patrice, over to you. You've got 8 minutes. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. As Shakira mentioned, I am a student at the University of Kent, and I have been employed as a diversity mark intern coming up to about 2 years now. So I just wanted to give you a bit of a summary about my role as a diversity mark intern. Initially, one of the things that we were assigned to do was to audit the reading list in the School of Social Sciences, the School of Social Policy, Sociology and Social Research, which I will refer to the SSPSSR reading list for short. So I have me and 3 other diversity mark interns. We sectioned out the reading list, and we were assigned to look and see if the authors of the books that were on our reading list were either white or Black or Asian ethnic minority authors. So we had the opportunity to firsthand see the course and what we were studying and the representation within it. And the overall findings were that the reading list were about 70 to 80% white male. And personally, I did expect it to be a majority white male reading list. As in sociology, my experience with sociology, we have majorly studied people like Durkheim, Marx. So that's what I'm used to seeing. But I would say going in and doing the auditing, I did think that because sociology is quite a diverse subject in the terms it talks about things like racial inequality, and I did think that there would be a little bit more of that represented in the reading list. And another thing that I noted when I was doing the auditing was that when we did come across BAME authors, it was often only to do with things to do with race, which I know that there are BAME authors out there who do talk about things that aren't just racially related, but that is generally the findings that I found and that my other diversity mark intern found when was doing the auditing process. The next thing that we did was, after finding out the percentages and understanding what was representative within the reading list, we did some focus groups. So I had the opportunity to both kind of recruit people like other students, and also got to co-lead a focus group with one of the other interns and get the opinions of the students that were within the SSPSSR department. So that was quite an enjoyable experience, because firsthand got to listen to new ideas and also relate it to some of the ideas and the conversations that we was having within the focus groups. And generally similar to myself, a lot of the students, they were aware that the majority of their reading lists were dominated by white male academics, but also they weren't made aware of the BAME contribution within sociology. So a lot of them weren't really aware of certain scholars such as Stuart Hall or Du Bois in the way that we were familiarized with Durkheim and other important sociologists. And I felt like having that in the focus, having a conversation with other students, it became very clear to me that within higher education, even in a subject such as sociology that talks about inequality, that there is still racial inequality, because the representation wasn't in the reading list, and also it wasn't really in the department either. I found that as well. Sorry. And I personally enjoyed being able to do the research firsthand. So regardless of what I thought before, once I had actually audited the reading list and had the focus loops and being able to talk to other students, I could firsthand see what was in my reading list and what was representative of me within the School of Social, SSPSSR, sorry. So I did enjoy being able to firsthand see what was in the reading list. And it was also a good experience because we had the opportunity to then present what we found and to be able to say, okay, yeah, this is what we have and this is not okay, and that we would like to change it. We would like to see more representation. And yeah, I think it just emphasized how important it is that we need to continue to put emphasis on diversifying the curriculum and being able to find scholars within the reading list that are of BAME representation. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrice. And it's really, again, inspiring to know that you were leading from a student's position to ensure that that feedback was able to be gathered and that you was able to kind of really have a better understanding through your auditing process of actually what does it look like. We feel it and we see it, but to actually see it on paper sometimes, it just brings that realization. So thank you again to all our panelists. I'd now like to open the floor to questions, and I know there's some questions that have been submitted throughout. So I'm just going to start off with an opening question just to all of the panelists. So two very different initiatives. Sorry, my dog. I briefed the kids, I briefed the husband, but I didn't brief the dog. Sorry about that. I'm trying to shush him. Sorry about that. So yeah, two different initiatives, really, really good. What were the kind of barriers and challenges that you came across in those two different sections? Anyone can answer first. Dr. Bravo?
Okay, I'll go first. So I think there were a number of challenges. I think there were some challenges in terms of operating in the current COVID period and the impact that was having on students. So there were challenges in being able to reach students in a way that you could when you had much more face-to-face contact, and also the kind of impact or the additional burden that you were placing on students and staff during a year that was extremely challenging and extremely difficult in terms of their time, in terms of their kind of emotional well. So there were the kind of added, there's been the kind of added ways in which you have to navigate and account for these challenges in terms of the kind of what you originally set out in terms of how many students you want to talk to, how quickly you want to talk to them, and working to people who are working in very kind of in ways that probably we've never had to work in HE before. The other and I'll just think the other challenge about the toolkit is really trying to produce a intervention that satisfies academics who some have no understanding or no familiarity with race, to others who are really well versed with the conversation. So to use an analogy, it was often, the toolkit has often been like trying to produce a cookbook for 10 people, two are master bakers and 8 have never even heard of flour, and trying to come up with a cookbook that kind of satisfies both. So I think that's kind of the challenges of actually operationalizing something like this, and also kind of trying to do research in this period that I know my research assistant, Ajam, has really had a whole challenges in trying to kind of reach out to people with all these complex and added complications at the moment.
Yeah, thank you. I think as you was talking in your presentations, one of the things I wrote down was agile. It felt like your approach to allow people to kind of interpret it from their different level. It felt like there was an agile approach, and then COVID on top of that obviously had to make it more like that. So thank you. Dr. Barbara?
Hi, yes, similar experiences, obviously because of the pandemic. So this year we've seen a severe change in the teaching technique, you know, where the teachers had to go from teaching in lecture rooms and seminar rooms and do everything online and pre-record their lectures. So in order for us to say to them, look, could you please, you know, give us some time to, you know, with your students, we were asking for something that was like you know, diamond dust, but we managed to get through this because, one, I had developed relationships with these conveners and their modules. I was familiar with their modules as well, which really helped to create this collaborative way of working. So they were up for the challenge, and so they were very, very kind during this time to allow us to have entrance into their Moodle pages, which then allowed Mi Young, who's our postdoc associate, who's working on the project, to actually go in and announce herself, like I'm doing right now, on camera, and say, hi everyone, welcome, please do fill in the survey. And then we found that not enough students were filling in the survey, so we actually got Patrice Mighton to do a recording of herself about being a diversity mark intern, and this would be a really good thing to do. So we decided to become far more creative in the way that we could, to get to students, you know, to make them understand that this was an important piece of research to be part of. So yeah, there was that, and also the whole idea about you know, understanding conveners' time. You know, time and stress that they were under, and maybe still under, because of family commitments, the dog, for example, getting in the way. You know, so things were not the same as in 2 years ago when we first did the pilot projects. We thought recruiting students on campus was difficult, but doing it online was even more challenging. So definitely those two things were a challenge.
I think timing is a definitely common. What is time? I think COVID's really made us reflect on time and appreciating people's time. I'm really keen to get into some of the questions that have been coming in. We've got a lot of good questions coming in. So Patrice, unless you've got anything to add to that in this particular bit, are you happy for me to move on? Go on, go for it.
To just piggyback off what Dr. Barbara said, it did become very difficult when the pandemic hit, because we were fortunate enough to be able to do 2 focus groups in person. And after COVID hit, it was a lot more difficult to try and get people to engage in certain things, because when it is online, it is very easy to just decide to not wanting to get involved. But I do think we did well in navigating a new kind of area of society and life.
Yeah, thank you, Patrice. Okay, so we're going to take a question from Sarah Louise Collins, and she says, great to recognise the complex puzzle of race equality gaps in HE. All too often, policymakers think tanks challenge HEIs to find the magic bullet initiative. Much of the activity in this area recognises an institutional-wide holistic approach. But, she says in capital letters, how can we better evidence the impact of this wider institutional approach on multiple activities over and alongside individual interventions? That's a bit of a long one. I'll ask the question again. How can we better evidence the impact the wider institutional approach or multiple activities have alongside the individual intervention? And yes, Dr. Paul, over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. And I think two things needed. One, and I think this is a challenge for universities, because universities are a huge, almost umbrella organizations with lots of different organizations that run through them. So thinking strategically, how can you kind of centralize all these kinds of activities so that you can have a sense of what's happening across the university? Because once you start being able to join up all the different activities, that pulls the evidence, and that also creates a much stronger narrative. And I often, and I actually think, you know, this, in many ways, this is a much more better approach to attack it, to kind of dealing with inequalities, because I think if you think of inequalities as almost a kind of mosaic of barriers, that actually to really to tackle them meaningfully, you kind of need to forensically address each thing at a time. So for example, there's no, well, the effectiveness of decolonizing the curriculum is going to be much less impactful if you don't have interventions on faculty representation. It's going to, so, and then, for example, if you've got representation in the faculty and Decolonizing Toolkit, if you don't look at, for example, assessment, and then if you don't look at sort of support services. So really, you need all these different kinds of interventions, but what the university needs to do is have a mechanism for being able to monitor and pull all of them in a larger narrative. I hope that kind of answers the question.
Okay.
You're on mute.
I was hoping not to do that, you know. Dr. Barbara, have you got anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I echo what Paul is saying. It is a very complex thing that we're looking at in terms of race equality, because it affects all different parts of the organization, you know, all different levels. And I think the key way to get impact is to get buy-in also from the top. So leadership has to have accountability here, you know, and to be able to disseminate the same consistent message about eradicating and reducing race equality gaps. So I believe that when you're, you know, faced with multiple activities, which we are here with Diversity Mark, we have created a toolkit, you know, like Paul, we've created a toolkit. We have a place that it lives on the website. There's a blog page for it. So all the communication and all the processes and the protocol is in one place, yeah? And then you have the communication-wise, you have specific contacts within student success who can then direct you, if you are a convener, to the library, or if you are someone who wants to start a focus group, again, you can come to the Student Success and speak to one of the Diversity Mark interns who know how to run the focus groups and will run that for you. Particularly if you are a white convener, you don't want to intimidate any of the students who would tend to be obviously BAME students within the focus group. So yeah, a toolkit is a good way to go to show that the impact is effective. And I think we're doing that quite well in both universities.
Thank you. And Patrice, and from a student's perspective, in all the different ways that you've engaged students through your process, how would you answer that question? Or any thoughts on it?
I just feel like the accessibility is just really important. Just knowing that there are like initiatives there, that different types of ways, because there's different types of people, so different ways of engaging them. So for example, the blog post, and there's also a toolkit, and there's so many different things within the project that can reach out to students, but also staff as well. It's kind of having like a variety of different ways to engage people.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So I'm just looking through the questions there, and mindful of time. I want to get through as many as possible. So if we can keep our responses as brief as possible, because I really want to get through. I'm going to ask, there's two questions that's come through from Francis Deepwell. I'm going to ask both of them because they're quite short together. And that is, how can these initiatives successfully move beyond the social sciences area? I think that is a really fantastic question and would be really helpful to colleagues that's on. And do either of the projects have any evidence of closing equality gaps in attainment? Over to you, Dr. Paul.
Succinctly, yeah, I think, yeah, two great questions. Firstly, I think, how can these initiatives successfully move beyond social science? Focus on pedagogy, because pedagogy cuts across subject discipline. The way that we teach is often not necessarily universal, but thinking about, for example, practice, thinking about, for example, kind of pedagogy, thinking about assessment. These are things which are applicable to all courses. So, regardless of what subject you're on, particularly in STEM, you can still kind of get something and think about the ways in which your content or your practice is prioritizing certain groups and marginalizing others. I think evidence for how it impacts, I think for us, the answer is to be seen. We're looking at it currently, but only once we've got through the entire academic year, we'll be able to see kind of a better overview of the impact.
Thank you, Dr. Paul. Dr. Barbara?
Okay, well, we have now 12 schools who have signed up to the Diversity Mark project. So that includes, obviously, non-social sciences. So we have biosciences, we have natural sciences. So yeah, the actual toolkit and the processes of, you know, conveners being very reflective about their reading lists and their resources and the way that they teach, you know, the students, now I was going to say in the classroom, but now it's online, isn't it? So yeah, the way they teach the content, and what is that content is now being used and applied by non-social science schools within the university. So we are definitely making some waves within those areas. And the second part of the question was about, do we have any evidence about reducing the attainment gap? Was that the question?
Yeah.
Well, we're at the moment, sorry to say, we do have data, which is, you know, 2 years of data, but we're still working on those findings at the moment. So I'm not able to give you, you know, statistics right now on that. So in a few months' time, we should be able to reveal those.
Thank you. Patrice, have you got anything to add? No? Okay, fantastic. I'm going to take another question from Rahina Bogal Welsh. This is really interesting question. Have you found the race report has impacted the work you have done so far? Has it helped or hindered the dialogue you are having to, or are you having to install change? And I think that's really interesting, because both at the beginning of your presentations, you made clarity around the term BAME, which I know that came out of the report. So it would be really interesting to hear your perspectives. And also, Patrice, if you've got anything to add from that. Dr. Barbara, because your mic's on, I'm going to go with you.
Yeah, okay. Well, to be frank with you, I'm not going to really give that report much airtime because I don't think it deserves it. So it hasn't affected how we have approached Diversity Mark, not at all, because I mean, part of Diversity Mark is talking about institutional racism within higher education, and it's talking about, you know, how Eurocentric the actual curriculum is, and that is due to racist connotations and derogatory remarks made with it, and also, you know, the marginalization and isolation of Black authors and authors from the global South. So it has not had any impact whatsoever on our approach to, in fact, it's fired me up even more, to be quite honest with you, to really make a real sustainable impact through Diversity Mark.
Thank you, Dr. Barbara. Dr. Paul?
Yeah, I think it's probably too early to say fully, but similarly to kind of Barbara, it's kind of given us added impetus, really, and if we weren't sure of the importance of this kind of work before, not that we weren't, but if ever you weren't, then that kind of really helped laser focus us on the importance of this kind of work, but also on the importance of going back to the point about qualitative, because one of the things that came out of that conversation, and a number of commentators who were supportive of that report, were very much this idea of it uses evidence, but what they were really, the subtext was it uses quantitative evidence, and that actually that this illustrates the kind of need not only to kind of present robust empirical and kind of qualitative data, but for us to really kind of explain to people the value of these accounts, because there's that ultimately we can't just keep butting our heads. We have to illustrate the importance and the kind of real validity and value of the qualitative account. And just your point on BAME, unfortunately for the report, even though that was something that you gave it credit, disaggregating the Black, Asian and minority experience was something that we probably has been subscribing to for nearly 20 years. So yeah, yes. So I'm sorry to take that kind of credit away from the report there as well, but no, it's helped motivate us, certainly.
More, Dr. Paul, more recognition that I've read it than credit. I don't.
Yeah, no,
just to be clear, just to be clear there. Thank you, Patrice. Have you got anything to add in that area?
I would definitely say, as a student and from a student point of view, seeing that report kind of definitely made me want to speak out more and wanted to do more. And I think there was a lot of outrage I saw around my peers in regards to that, because like when you firsthand know what it's like, it's kind of like when it's trying to dismiss it, it can be very frustrating. So I feel like for me and for a lot of the young people, it was like, we need to do more. There's so much work that needs to be done and we can't stop. We have to keep going. And it's great that there are initiatives that have like decided, yeah, we need to keep going. We need to fight even more because we want our voices to be heard. We want to be recognized. We want to be seen and we want to be heard. So it's very important to keep going and keep putting emphasis and energy into these initiatives.
Yeah, that is really encouraging to hear, because sometimes you can get burnt out by just all this stuff. So to know that the younger generation, the leaders of the future, have still got that fire in their belly to kind of make change and be change makers, that is encouraging to me, and I'm sure many other colleagues as well. So there's two questions I'm going to take. I'm going to take them together because they're quite small. One follows on nicely from what Dr. Paul was saying about the quantitative data, but I'm just going to say the two questions and you can answer as you wish to all the panelists. So the first one was about the quantitative data is usually more valued by those at the top. How can we present qualitative data in a way that has more impact? And the other question was, what processes was used or could be used to determine the ethnicity of authors on reading lists? And those are from, the first one's from Emma Clift and the second from Pete Gregory, sorry. Patrice, I haven't made you go first. I know that's not directly your question, but if you have anything to say, then you can go first.
Sorry, my short-term memory is not great. Could you repeat the first question for me, please?
Yeah. What the first question was that Dr. Paul said that quantitative data is usually more valued by those at the top. How can we present qualitative data in ways that have more impact?
I can only say that in regards to focus groups, I think that that is a good way to get them to see, or be even like being able to observe it firsthand, to see the conversations firsthand in regards to qualitative data. I think that that would be quite strong, but I do think that within people that are higher up there is this idea that quantitative data is enough, and to shift that narrative is going to be difficult, and they will have to really consume a lot of qualitative data or to be able to shift that mindset. But I can only say that for me, I feel like focus groups are quite helpful. But yeah, I can't speak too much on it because I don't feel like I have as much experience within that. Could you repeat the second question for me, please?
And the second question, sorry, I just need to find it, was, oh gosh, now I've gone all up, sorry. My second question, oh my gosh, I've lost it. I've completely just lost my where I'm at on the question bits, but I'm sure Dr. Paul or Dr. Barbara remembers them, so I'm going to go over to them, and then if you've got anything to add, Patrice, you can jump in. Did you like that segue? Right. Any rest talk with that?
Very nice, very slick, Sharika. Yes. Right, so the answer to the first part of the question about quantitative data, yes, it is important. I totally agree with that. And leadership and stakeholders like to see data. They like to see good data that provides trends and could then provide an impact, a sustainable impact. However, what we're dealing with here are human beings and people's lives and their lived experiences. So as Paul said earlier, it's very, very important to have a mixed method approach to this sort of research that we're doing. You know, diversity mark is a step towards decolonizing the curriculum. It's not the whole thing. It's not a perfect silver bullet answer to, but it's an approach. It's a step-by-step approach. And through that, Patrice has actually done a massive amount of qualitative data, providing in her presentations with her reflections on her lived experiences of where she is in the curriculum. You know, can she find herself as a Black woman in the curriculum? And she's actually done a couple of presentations on those ideas before. So qualitative data is absolutely essential part of this research that we're doing. However, with diversity mark, we are doing randomized controlled tests because we have been able to build the data on the you know, the core reading lists. So we've been able to gather that data over the last 2 years, which we're still working on. And I think the second question was to do with that the actual
reading
methodology.
List. Yes, I remember.
The methodology of the reading list and how is that determined? Well, what we did was that we, well, actually, Patrice can answer some of that. So I'll take a little bit of it first. So we decided that we needed to find out the author's ethnicity, you know, their background, so whether they were Black, whether they were white, so Black constituting any ethnic minority group, and white constituting obviously Caucasian, European, European Western categories. And so students were asked to do that methodology, and they were able to find things out through going through different processes. Patrice, what process did you use to find out about the authors?
I did a lot of Googling. I looked for images of the authors. I looked for more things that they wrote to kind of understand generally about the thing, if they were an academic or if it was like the wrong name, because sometimes it could be the same person with a different name. So I kind of just did a lot of Googling and researching of the different authors. And then there was spreadsheets. So with the spreadsheet, I would put like if they were Black or if they were white, or also their gender as well. So I just did a lot of research. I didn't want to put anything in there straight away. So I would research one book or author and just try and find more on their work and pictures of them just to clarify what they look like. Yeah.
Thank you, Patrice. So Omar's come. I know I'm running over time. So Dr. Paul, I just want to give you the last bit, if you could sum it up. Sorry about that, Omar. Thank you.
No worries. So I think how do we present qualitative data? Well, I think qualitative data is really useful. It's extremely powerful. Capturing people's accounts are really, really powerful, and chorusing. So particularly when lots of people are saying very similar things, it paints a very powerful picture. But I think the real trick, or one of the ways in which we can kind of get qualitative data valued much more, is to be able to move from qualitative data to clear policy outcomes, guidance, and policy recommendations. Because once you move from the data to actions, then that's, in effect, that's what all institutions want. They want, how do we move forward with this? So really anything that can show the value of qualitative data in producing clear outcomes will help to kind of convince the non-believers of qualitative data. And just before I go, I'd like to say thanks to the panel, great panel, and also just, I think Patrice has been fantastic. So again, just thanks for inviting me, and thanks to everyone else.
Thank you. I had a little closing bit, but I've lost my time. But I wanted to say thank you to the panelists. Yeah, just to echo Dr. Paul, thank you for your time, Patrice, and for your student views. Dr. Barbara, it's been a pleasure. Thank you to the audience for giving questions. Over to you, Omar. Can't be good at everything. Sorry, timekeeping ain't my one.
No, you were very good. Sorry about that, Shakira. No, it was great. I mean, there was so much more richness to the discussion. And as I think you heard in some of the answers, it's also the case that the project is ongoing. And it's one of the exciting things for TASO. It's we're working alongside both these teams, Paul and Barbara and Patrice, to try to help support them in demonstrating that impact. That was one of the questions. So I am going to ask you all to log off now. I want to thank you all, thank all the panels, thank Shakira, because we have one final speaker before the conference ends. But I'm really grateful for this final panel, and thank you for your presentations.